They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that greed is thicker than both. My name is Serena, and for 25 years, I believed my older brother Marcus was my protector, my ally in a family that never quite knew what to do with me. I was wrong about everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning I discovered the truth, I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment, laptop balanced on my knees, trying to stretch my grocery budget for another week. The coffee was instant, the furniture was secondhand, and the view from my window was a brick wall. I had been living like this for 3 years, ever since graduating college with a degree in environmental science and dreams bigger than my bank account. What I didn't know was that I should have been living very differently. The call came from Mr. Henderson, our family's longtime attorney. His voice was careful, measured, the way lawyers speak when they're about to deliver news that will shatter your world. "Serena, I need you to come to my office today. There's been an irregularity with your trust fund that requires immediate attention." Trust fund. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had never heard those words applied to me before. Growing up, Marcus had always been the golden child. He drove luxury cars, attended private schools, and seemed to have an endless supply of money for his business ventures. When I asked about college funding, I was told to apply for scholarships. When I needed help with rent, I was advised to get a second job. Meanwhile, Marcus lived in a penthouse downtown, wore designer suits, and threw parties that cost more than my annual salary. I had always assumed this was simply the natural order of things. He was the firstborn son, the heir apparent. I was the afterthought. But as I sat in Mr. Henderson's mahogany-paneled office that afternoon, staring at documents that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics, the truth began to crystallize like poison in my veins. There had been a trust fund set up for me when I was born, $750,000, established by my late grandfather with explicit instructions that it was to be released to me on my 21st birthday, with annual distributions beginning immediately after college graduation. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Henderson's face was grave as he slid another set of documents across his desk. "That's what we need to discuss. Your brother has been serving as the trustee since your father's stroke 3 years ago. According to these records, the funds have been reallocated." Reallocated, such a clinical word for theft, such a gentle term for the systematic destruction of my future. I scanned the papers, seeing Marcus's signature again and again, authorizing transfers, approvals, liquidations. Every dollar that should have been mine had been funneled into his business ventures, his lifestyle, his dreams, while I scraped together quarters for laundry detergent. "How is this legal?" I demanded. "It's not," Mr. Henderson replied quietly. "Your brother exceeded his authority as trustee. These transactions were unauthorized and, frankly, criminal, but proving it in court will be complicated, expensive, and time-consuming. Many families prefer to handle these matters privately." I walked out of that office in a daze, the documents clutched in my trembling hands like evidence of my own stupidity. How had I never known? How had I lived for 25 years believing I was the poor relation when I should have been financially secure? The answer was simple and devastating. Marcus had lied. My parents had been complicit in their silence, and I had been too naive, too trusting, too grateful for whatever scraps of affection they threw my way to ask the right questions. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the papers until my eyes burned. $750,000. Gone. Transferred into Marcus's accounts to fund his real estate development company, his sports car collection, his engagement ring for his fiancée. My grandfather's final gift to me, his way of ensuring I would have opportunities and security, had been stolen by the person I trusted most in the world. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else took its place, something cold and calculating and utterly foreign to the person I had been that morning. I had been living like a pauper while my inheritance funded my brother's champagne lifestyle. I had been dismissed, overlooked, and patronized while my own money bought his success. The realization didn't just hurt, it transformed me. I spent the next week doing research. Not just about trust law and fiduciary responsibility, though I learned plenty about both. I researched Marcus's business dealings, his company's financial status, his recent investments. What I discovered was fascinating and useful. My brother's real estate empire, built on what he claimed was his brilliant business acumen and risk-taking ability, was actually a house of cards held together by my stolen inheritance and an increasingly precarious web of loans and leveraged investments. His company, Ashford Development, was heavily mortgaged and dependent on a series of construction loans that required constant refinancing. His personal spending had escalated dramatically since his engagement to Vivian, a former socialite who expected a lifestyle that matched her family's wealth. The penthouse apartment, the cars, the elaborate wedding being planned for next spring, all of it was being funded by money that legally belonged to me. More importantly, I discovered that Marcus had been using my trust fund as collateral for his business loans. The banks and investors he worked with believed he had legitimate access to those funds. If that access were suddenly revoked, if those funds were frozen or reclaimed, his entire financial structure would collapse overnight. I smiled for the first time in a week.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Not a happy smile, but something sharper and more purposeful. Marcus had always been the smart one, the successful one, the one everyone pointed to with pride. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated me so completely that he never bothered to cover his tracks properly. And now I had the power to destroy everything he had built with my own money. The family dinner was scheduled for Sunday, as it had been every month for years. These gatherings were held at my parents' estate in the suburbs, elaborate affairs where Marcus would hold court, discussing his latest business triumphs, while I sat quietly in the corner, grateful to be included. This Sunday would be different. I arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained copies of every document Mr. Henderson had shown me, plus several more that I had obtained through my own investigation. My parents greeted me with their usual distracted affection, more focused on Marcus's pending arrival than on my presence. Vivian was already there, draped across the sofa in a designer dress that probably cost more than my rent, discussing wedding venues with my mother as if price were no object. When Marcus finally arrived, he made his usual grand entrance, kissing my mother's cheek, shaking my father's hand, embracing his fiancée with theatrical affection. He barely glanced at me, offering only a casual, "Hey, Serena," before launching into a story about his latest property acquisition. I listened with new ears as he described the luxurious downtown development he was planning, the high-end condominiums that would bring enormous profits, the investors who were lining up to participate in his vision. "It's going to revolutionize that entire neighborhood," he declared, his voice full of pride and self-satisfaction. "We break ground next month, and by this time next year, we'll have transformed 20 acres of urban decay into premium living space. The profit margins are incredible." My father nodded approvingly. "You've built something remarkable, son. Your grandfather would be proud." The mention of my grandfather sent a sharp pain through my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. Marcus basked in the praise, describing his business philosophy, his risk management strategies, his plans for expansion. Everything he said was built on a foundation of lies, funded by money stolen from me. But he spoke with such confidence and authority that even I almost believed he deserved the credit. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, under the crystal chandelier that had belonged to my grandmother. The conversation flowed around me like water, touching on Marcus's business success, Vivian's wedding plans, my parents' upcoming anniversary cruise. I was barely included, as usual, occasionally asked about my work at the environmental consulting firm where I had finally found entry-level employment after months of searching. "Still saving the world one recycling program at a time?" Marcus asked with condescending amusement when I mentioned a project I was working on. "Someone has to care about the future," I replied quietly. Well, that's very noble, Vivian chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Though I suppose not everyone can be cut out for real business success. Some people are just more practical in their ambitions. The table chuckled at her observation, my parents nodding as if she had made a profound insight about my character. In their minds, I was the dreamer, the idealist, the one who would always struggle financially because I had chosen passion over profit. They had no idea that my financial struggles were the direct result of my brother's theft, not my career choices. I waited until dessert was served, until everyone was relaxed and comfortable, until Marcus was in the middle of another story about his business acumen. Then I opened my portfolio. Marcus, I said quietly, my voice cutting through his narrative like a knife through silk. I need to ask you about my trust fund. The effect was immediate and electric. Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, suspended in air, as his face went pale. My mother's smile froze. My father's eyebrows rose in confusion. Vivian looked around the table with growing alarm, sensing the shift in atmosphere but not understanding its cause. "Your what?" my mother asked. "My trust fund," I repeated, my voice steady and clear. "The one grandfather established for me when I was born. The $750,000 that was supposed to be released to me on my 21st birthday." I pulled out the first document and placed it on the table where everyone could see it. The one that Marcus has been managing as trustee for the past 3 years. The silence that followed was deafening. My father reached for the document with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the legal language with growing comprehension. My mother's face had gone white, her lips pressed into a thin line. Vivian was staring at Marcus with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. But it was Marcus's reaction that satisfied me most. His confident facade had crumpled completely, revealing the panic beneath. His hands were trembling, his breathing shallow, his eyes darting around the table as if looking for an escape route. The golden boy, the successful businessman, the family pride had been reduced to a cornered animal in the space of 30 seconds. "I can explain," he stammered, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Actually, let me explain," I said calmly, pulling out another document. "This is a record of every transaction you've made using my trust fund over the past 3 years. $750,000 systematically transferred into your business accounts, your personal accounts, and various investment vehicles." I placed the paper next to the first one. Money that legally belonged to me. Money that you had no authority to touch. My father's face was red with anger, but I couldn't tell if it was directed at Marcus or at me for bringing this ugly truth to light at the family dinner table. My mother looked like she might faint. Vivian was staring at the documents as if they were radioactive. "You don't understand," Marcus said desperately. "It was an investment strategy. I was growing the money, making it work harder. I was going to pay it call back with interest." I almost laughed at the transparency of his lie. "With what, Marcus? Your company is leveraged to the hilt. You've been using my trust fund as collateral for loans you can't afford to repay. You've mortgaged my future to fund your lifestyle." I pulled out another set of documents. "These are your company's financial statements. Would you like me to explain to everyone how close Ashford Development is to bankruptcy?" The words hit him like physical blows. His shoulders sagged, his confident posture dissolving into defeat. Around the table, my family members were beginning to understand the scope of what had happened. Not just theft, but systematic deception that had lasted for years. "How could you do this to your sister?" my mother whispered, her voice broken. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "The business was going to take off. I was going to make enough to pay her back and more. She would have been better off in the long run." "Better off?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I've been living in poverty for 3 years because I thought I had no money. I've been working 2 jobs, eating ramen noodles, walking to work because I couldn't afford bus fare, while you've been living like a king on my inheritance. You let me believe I was the family failure while you built your success on money you stole from me." The truth hung in the air like poison gas, contaminating everything it touched. My parents' pride in Marcus's achievements was revealed as a fraud. Vivian's faith in her fiancé's financial stability was shown to be built on sand. The family dynamic that had defined us for decades was exposed as a lie. We didn't know, my father said weakly. We had no idea about the trust fund. I turned to look at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. Didn't you? Grandfather's will was read in front of all of us. The trust was established in a formal legal document. You signed papers transferring trustee authority to Marcus. You knew exactly what was happening. You just chose not to think about it as long as Marcus was successful. The accusation hit home. My father's face crumpled with shame and recognition. They had all been complicit in their silence, willfully blind to the source of Marcus's sudden wealth, content to believe in his genius as long as it reflected well on the family name. Vivian was the first to break the horrified silence. Marcus, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't steal money from your own sister. Her voice was high and desperate, clinging to the hope that there was some explanation that would preserve her world. Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. Vivian, I can fix this. The development project is going to be huge. Once we get the construction completed, there will be enough profit to pay Serena back and still have plenty left over. With what? I interjected, pulling out yet another document. This is a notice from your primary construction lender. They're threatening to pull funding unless you can provide additional collateral by the end of the month. Without my trust fund backing your loans, you can't meet their requirements. The paper trembled in Marcus's hands as he read it. I had been thorough in my research, contacting banks and investors under the guise of conducting due diligence for a potential partnership. What I had learned was that my brother's empire was even more precarious than I had initially suspected. He wasn't just using my money to fund his lifestyle. He was using it as the foundation for an increasingly desperate pyramid of debt and speculation. "How did you get this?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I've been busy this week," I replied, learning about my legal rights, investigating your business practices, talking to your lenders and investors. Did you know that most of them have no idea you're not the legitimate owner of the funds you've been using as collateral? They think you're a successful young entrepreneur with substantial family backing. They have no idea they've been dealing with a thief. The word hung in the air like a curse. Thief. That's what Marcus was, stripped of all pretense and justification. He had stolen my inheritance and used it to build a false reputation, then leveraged that reputation to borrow even more money he couldn't repay. The elegant business strategy he bragged about was nothing more than an elaborate con game, with me as the unwitting victim. My mother was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face as she stared at her son with a mixture of love and horror. "Marcus, how could you do this? How could you hurt your sister like this?" "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said desperately. "I thought I could make it work. I thought I could grow the money and give her back more than she started with. I was trying to help the whole family." "By lying to us for 3 years?" My father's voice was harsh with anger and disappointment. "By letting your sister struggle while you lived in luxury? By risking everything on business deals you couldn't afford?" "I'm good at what I do," Marcus insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "The real estate market is just going through a rough patch. Once things turn around—" "Stop." I held up my hand, cutting off his desperate rationalizations. "Just stop lying. To them, to me, to yourself. Your business is failing because it was built on stolen money and unrealistic projections. You've been living beyond your means for years, using my inheritance to maintain a lifestyle you never earned." My mother was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face as she stared at her son with a mixture of love and horror. "Marcus, how could you do this? How could you hurt your sister like this?" "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said desperately. "I thought I could make it work. I thought I could grow the money and give her back more than she started with. I was trying to help the whole family." "By lying to us for 3 years?" My father's voice was harsh with anger and disappointment. "By letting your sister struggle while you lived in luxury? By risking everything on business deals you couldn't afford?" "I'm good at what I do," Marcus insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "The real estate market is just going through a rough patch. Once things turn around—" "Stop." I held up my hand, cutting off his desperate rationalizations. "Just stop lying. To them, to me, to yourself. Your business is failing because it was built on stolen money and unrealistic projections. You've been living beyond your means for years, using my inheritance to maintain a lifestyle you never earned.
And now, when the bills are coming due, you want to blame market conditions? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I had saved earlier in the week. I spoke with Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit yesterday. Grand theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud are serious charges, Marcus. The district attorney's office is very interested in cases involving stolen trust funds, especially when the amounts are substantial. The color drained from Marcus's face completely. You can't be serious. You wouldn't really call the police on your own brother. Wouldn't I? I met his eyes steadily, letting him see the resolve there. You called me the family failure. You laughed when Vivian made jokes about my practical ambitions. You let me believe I was poor while you spent my money on sports cars and designer suits. You stole my future and used it to buy yourself a reputation you didn't deserve. Why exactly should I protect you now? The question hung in the air unanswered because there was no good answer. Marcus had gambled everything on the assumption that I would never find out about the trust fund, and if I did, that I would be too weak, too grateful for family acceptance, too afraid of conflict to fight back. He had counted on my passivity, my desire to belong, my willingness to accept whatever role they assigned me. He had been catastrophically wrong. "Please," he whispered, and for the first time in my life, I heard genuine fear in my older brother's voice. "Don't destroy everything. Give me a chance to fix this. I can find investors, I can refinance, I can make this right." "With what collateral?" I asked coldly. "Your business is mortgaged beyond its value. Your personal assets are financed with loans you can't repay. Your reputation is about to be destroyed when your lenders discover you've been defrauding them. You have nothing left to bargain with because you spent it all." Vivian was staring at Marcus with growing horror as the full scope of their situation became clear. Her wedding, her lifestyle, her future security were all built on money that didn't belong to him, and a business that was collapsing. "Marcus, what about our wedding? What about the deposits we've made, the venue, the caterer?" "We'll figure something out," he said weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Figure what out?" she demanded, her voice rising with panic. "You just lost $750,000 that wasn't yours to lose. Your business is failing. The police might be involved. What exactly are we going to figure out?" I watched their relationship crumble in real time, and while I didn't take pleasure in Vivian's pain, I felt a cold satisfaction at seeing Marcus face the consequences of his choices. He had built his adult life on a foundation of lies and theft, and now that foundation was crumbling, taking everything else down with it. My father was still studying the financial documents, his businessman's mind processing the implications. "These loan agreements," he said slowly, "they're personally guaranteed by Marcus. If the business fails, they can come after his personal assets, which are also mortgaged or financed," I added helpfully. "The penthouse apartment has 2 mortgages against it. The sports cars are leased. Even his watch collection is pledged as collateral for a personal loan." Marcus slumped in his chair, finally understanding that there was no escape route, no clever financial maneuver that would save him. He had painted himself into a corner, using my money as his brush, and now the paint was drying with him trapped inside. "What do you want?" he asked quietly, the fight going out of him completely. I had been waiting for this question, preparing my answer for days. "I want my money back. All of it, with interest calculated at the statutory rate for the past 3 years. I want it transferred back into the trust account within 30 days. "That's impossible," he said immediately. "I don't have that kind of liquid cash." "Then you'll have to liquidate assets," I replied calmly. "Sell the penthouse, sell the cars, dissolve the business if necessary. Whatever it takes to return what you stole from me. But if I do that, I'll lose everything." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You should have thought about that before you stole my inheritance. You made your choices, Marcus. You chose to take money that didn't belong to you. You chose to lie to your family. You chose to gamble with my future. Now you get to live with the consequences." The silence that followed was profound and damning. My parents sat frozen, understanding that their family was disintegrating before their eyes. Vivian was quietly crying, her dreams of a fairy tale wedding and secure future evaporating. Marcus stared at his hands, finally forced to confront the reality of what he had done. 30 days, I repeated, standing up from the table. Transfer my money back into the trust account with interest within 30 days, or I file criminal charges and civil suits that will destroy what's left of your reputation and put you in prison. I gathered my documents and slid them back into the portfolio, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. For 25 years, I had been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one who accepted whatever scraps of attention and affection they offered. Tonight, I had found my voice, and it was stronger than any of them had imagined. "Serena, wait," my mother called as I headed toward the door. "We can work this out as a family."
We don't need lawyers and police involved in our personal business. I turned back to look at her, seeing the desperation in her eyes. She was more concerned about the family reputation than about the injustice that had been done to me, more worried about scandal than about the fact that her son had systematically robbed her daughter. "We stopped being a family the moment Marcus decided to steal from me," I said quietly, "and we stopped having the luxury of handling this privately the moment he spent the last dollar of my inheritance on his fantasy lifestyle." I walked out of that house without looking back, leaving them to sit with the wreckage of their illusions. The cool night air felt like freedom against my face, and for the first time in years, I felt like I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. The 30 days that followed were a masterclass in watching someone's world collapse in slow motion. Marcus tried everything he could think of to raise the money without destroying his lifestyle completely. He approached investors with increasingly desperate propositions. He attempted to refinance loans that were already underwater. He even tried to convince my parents to mortgage their house to help him cover the debt, a request that finally showed them just how deep his selfishness ran. But the mathematics were inexorable. $750,000 plus 3 years of statutory interest came to nearly $900,000. Marcus had spread that money across so many investments, purchases, and expenses that recovering it would require dismantling his entire financial structure. The first asset to go was the sports car collection. 3 vehicles that had cost him nearly $200,000 of my money sold for less than half that amount in a distressed sale. Next came the expensive watches, the art collection, the premium furniture from his penthouse. Each sale was a public acknowledgement of his financial desperation, a visible sign that the golden boy was not so golden after all. His business began to unravel as word spread through the real estate community that Ashford Development was facing financial difficulties. Partners withdrew from deals, lenders demanded additional collateral he couldn't provide, and potential investors lost confidence in his ability to manage their money. The development project he had been so proud of was canceled when the primary lender pulled funding, unable to secure adequate guarantees. Vivian ended their engagement 2 weeks into the 30-day countdown, returning her expensive ring and moving back to her parents' house. The conversation between them, according to mutual friends who witnessed it, was brutal and final. She accused him of building their relationship on lies, and he accused her of abandoning him when he needed support most. Both accusations were probably true. My parents, meanwhile, went through their own crisis of conscience. They had spent years praising Marcus's business acumen and treating me as the disappointing child who couldn't match his success. Now they were forced to confront the reality that their pride in his achievements had been based on his theft from me. The cognitive dissonance was almost too much for them to bear. My father called me several times during those 30 days, alternating between anger at Marcus for his betrayal and frustration with me for refusing to work something out privately. My mother sent lengthy text messages pleading with me to consider the family's reputation, to think about how the scandal would affect all of us, to remember that Marcus was still my brother despite his mistakes. I ignored most of their communications. They had had 3 years to notice that Marcus was living beyond any reasonable means, 3 years to ask where his sudden wealth had come from, 3 years to check on my welfare as I struggled financially. Their concern now felt too little and far too late. The turning point came on day 28, when Marcus finally admitted defeat. His lawyer called Mr. Henderson to negotiate the terms of the money transfer, acknowledging that my claim was legally sound and that fighting it in court would only result in additional costs and criminal charges. The penthouse apartment would be sold, along with the remaining assets, and the proceeds would be transferred back to my trust account. On day 31, I received a call from Mr. Henderson confirming that $893,000 had been deposited into my trust account. It was more money than I had ever imagined having, but it felt less like a windfall than like justice finally served. This was what my grandfather had intended for me, what should have been available to me all along, what would have changed the trajectory of my entire adult life if Marcus hadn't stolen it. The first thing I did was quit both my jobs. The second thing I did was move out of my cramped studio apartment and into a comfortable two-bedroom place with actual sunlight and a view of something other than a brick wall. I bought a reliable car, paid off my student loans, and set aside enough money to live comfortably while I decided what to do next. But the most satisfying thing I did was research Marcus's new circumstances. The penthouse apartment had been sold at a significant loss in a forced liquidation. He had moved back in with our parents, sleeping in his childhood bedroom like a teenager. His business was officially defunct, its assets sold to pay creditors. He had taken a job as a sales associate at a mid-tier real estate firm, earning a fraction of what he had claimed as income during his years of prosperity. Vivian, meanwhile, had quickly moved on to dating the heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, someone with wealth that was actually his own. She had posted photos on social media of her new boyfriend's yacht, his family's estate, his expensive gifts, as if to demonstrate that she had upgraded from Marcus's fraudulent luxury to the real thing. My parents were struggling with the social embarrassment of having their successful son revealed as a thief and fraud. Friends who had envied Marcus's achievements now whispered about his downfall. Business associates who had respected his apparent acumen now viewed him as a cautionary tale. The family name that they had been so concerned about protecting had been damaged far more by the truth coming out than it would have been by handling the matter quietly from the beginning. 6 months after that fateful dinner, I received an unexpected phone call from Marcus. His voice was subdued, stripped of the confidence and bravado that had once defined him. He asked if we could meet for coffee, said he wanted to apologize properly, to try to explain his actions and make amends beyond just returning the money. I almost said no. Part of me felt that he had lost the right to my time and attention along with my trust and respect. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet him at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory, where neither of us had the advantage. He looked different when I saw him, older somehow and smaller. The expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing. The confidence that had once radiated from him like heat from a fire had been extinguished, leaving behind someone who seemed uncertain and ashamed. He had ordered coffee and was stirring it nervously when I arrived, his eyes darting up to meet mine with something that looked like fear. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I replied, settling into the chair across from him. "What do you want, Marcus?" He winced at the coldness in my voice, but pressed on. "I want to apologize, really apologize, not the desperate excuses I was making that night at dinner. I want you to know that I understand what I did to you, and I'm ashamed of it." "You should be ashamed," I said evenly. "You stole my future and used it to buy yourself a reputation you didn't earn." "I know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I told myself I was investing your money, growing it, that you'd be better off in the long run."
But that was just rationalization. The truth is, I saw an opportunity to live the life I wanted, and I took it without thinking about how it would affect you. You didn't just not think about it, I corrected him. You actively chose to let me struggle. You watched me work 2 jobs, eat cheap food, walk to work in the rain, and you said nothing. You let me believe I was the family disappointment while you bought sports cars with my inheritance. He nodded miserably. "You're right. I was selfish and cruel, and I have no excuse for it. I've lost everything, and I deserved to lose everything, but that doesn't undo the harm I caused you." "No, it doesn't." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but seeing only genuine remorse. "Why are you telling me this now? What do you hope to accomplish?" "Nothing," he said, and I believed him.
I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect us to be brother and sister again the way we used to be. I just wanted you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I did, and I'm sorry. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of 3 years of lies and betrayal hanging between us like a physical presence. Part of me wanted to rage at him, to catalog every way his theft had hurt me, every opportunity I had missed, every moment of desperation I had endured because of his greed. But I found that the anger had settled into something colder and more distant. He had already lost everything that mattered to him. My fury couldn't take anything more from him than his own choices already had. I'm not going to forgive you, I said finally. Not today, maybe not ever. What you did was unforgivable. I know. But I'm also not going to carry hatred for you around like a poison. You've already taken enough from me. I won't let you take my peace of mind, too. He looked up at me with something that might have been gratitude. What will you do now, with the money, I mean? It was a fair question, and one I had been thinking about for months. I'm going to use it the way grandfather intended, to build a life for myself, to create opportunities, to make choices based on what I want rather than what I can afford. I paused, considering how much to share with him. I'm thinking about starting my own environmental consulting firm. There's a lot of work in renewable energy development, and I have the capital now to take the risk. That sounds perfect for you, he said, and for the first time since I had arrived, he almost smiled. You were always passionate about that stuff, even when we were kids. Remember how you used to collect aluminum cans to recycle, and you made charts showing how much energy we could save by turning off lights? I did remember, though I was surprised he did. Those had been the projects of an idealistic child, dismissed by the rest of the family as cute but impractical. Now they seemed like early indicators of the path I was finally free to pursue. I remember you calling me a tree hugger, I said. I was an idiot teenager who thought making money was the only thing that mattered. He stared into his coffee cup. I guess I never really grew out of that mindset until it was too late. We talked for another few minutes, carefully avoiding the raw wounds of our shared history, focusing instead on neutral topics like the weather and current events. When I finally stood to leave, he looked up at me with an expression of profound regret. I hope you build something amazing, he said quietly. You deserve success, real success that you earn yourself. I intend to, I replied, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. That conversation marked the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. I had reclaimed my stolen inheritance, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my sense of self-worth and my vision for the future. The money was significant, but the knowledge that I could stand up for myself, that I could demand justice and follow through on my threats, was transformative. Within a year, I had launched Verde Consulting, specializing in environmental impact assessments and sustainable development planning. The trust fund money gave me the freedom to be selective about clients, to work only with companies and organizations whose values aligned with my own, to build the kind of business I believed in rather than the kind that would simply pay the bills. My first major contract was with a renewable energy company developing wind farms in rural areas. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now making more money in a month than Marcus earned in his new job, using skills and knowledge I had developed while he was spending my inheritance on luxury items that had lost most of their value. The business grew faster than I had anticipated, fueled by increasing demand for environmental expertise and my reputation for thorough, honest work. Within 2 years, I had hired 3 employees and moved into a proper office space. Within 3 years, Verde Consulting was being mentioned in industry publications as one of the most promising new firms in the field. My parents and I maintained a distant but cordial relationship. They never explicitly acknowledged their role in enabling Marcus's theft, but they seemed to understand that their casual dismissal of me over the years had contributed to the family's destruction. They invited me to occasional dinners, awkward affairs, where we discussed safe topics like gardening and weather while carefully avoiding any mention of Marcus or the trust fund scandal. Marcus himself had essentially vanished from my life. I heard updates occasionally through mutual acquaintances or family friends who didn't realize the depth of our estrangement. He was still working at the real estate firm, apparently performing adequately but without distinction. He had moved out of our parents' house into a modest apartment, was dating someone new, and seemed to be trying to rebuild his life from the ground up. I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy at these reports. He had become irrelevant to me, a character from a story I had finished reading. The real transformation was in how I saw myself and how others saw me. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't struggling to make ends meet or accepting whatever opportunities came my way out of desperation. I could afford to be selective, to maintain high standards, to turn down work that didn't align with my values or vision. This financial security translated into a confidence that affected every aspect of my life. When potential clients tried to lowball my consulting fees, I politely declined rather than accepting inadequate compensation. When developers attempted to pressure me into approving environmentally questionable projects, I stood firm in my professional judgment. When industry colleagues made dismissive comments about environmental regulations, I challenged their assumptions with data and expertise rather than staying quiet to avoid conflict. The woman who had once sat silently at family dinners while being mocked and dismissed was gone, replaced by someone who commanded respect through competence and refused to accept less than she was worth.
It was a metamorphosis that went far deeper than the financial windfall that had triggered it. One evening, about 4 years after that confrontation at the family dinner, I was working late in my office when my assistant knocked on the door. Sarah was a recent environmental science graduate who reminded me of myself at that age, brilliant and passionate, but still learning to navigate the professional world with confidence. "There's someone here to see you," she said, looking puzzled. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. His name is Marcus Ashford." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest at the mention of my brother's name, but it was different from the rage and betrayal I had once felt. Now it was more like the mild annoyance of an old wound that occasionally ached in bad weather. "Send him in," I said, curious despite myself about what could have brought him to my office after years of mutual avoidance. Marcus entered hesitantly, looking around at the modern office space with its floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek furniture. He seemed smaller than I remembered, diminished not just by his reduced circumstances, but by something deeper. The arrogance that had once defined him had been completely stripped away, leaving behind someone who appeared genuinely humble. "This is impressive," he said, gesturing at the office. "You've built something remarkable here." "Thank you." I gestured to one of the chairs across from my desk. "What can I do for you, Marcus?" He sat down carefully, as if unsure of his welcome. "I have a proposition for you, a business opportunity that I think you might find interesting." I leaned back in my chair, studying his face for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives. "I'm listening, but I should tell you up front that I'm very selective about the projects I take on." "I understand, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't think this was something that would genuinely interest you." He reached into a worn briefcase and pulled out a folder. "There's a piece of property about an hour north of the city, 50 acres of mostly undeveloped land that's been in the same family for 3 generations. The current owners want to sell, but they're committed to ensuring that any development is environmentally responsible." Despite my wariness, I found myself intrigued. Environmentally conscious development was exactly the kind of work I most enjoyed, and 50 acres represented significant potential impact. "What kind of development are they considering?" I asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Marcus said, his voice gaining some of the enthusiasm I remembered from his business pitches, though tempered now with humility. "They're not sure yet. They want to hire a consultant to assess the land's ecological value and recommend the most sustainable use. It could be conservation, selective development, renewable energy, or some combination of approaches." "And why are you bringing this to me instead of pursuing it yourself?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "Because I'm not qualified to handle this kind of project, and even if I were, the owners specifically requested someone with environmental expertise and an impeccable reputation. Your name came up when they were asking around for recommendations." I opened the folder he had handed me, scanning the preliminary information about the property. The land included wetlands, mature forest, and open meadows, plus several historic structures that would need to be preserved. It was exactly the kind of complex, multifaceted project that challenged me professionally while allowing me to make a meaningful environmental impact. "What's your role in this?" I asked suspiciously.
I would be the project coordinator, handling logistics and client communications while you focus on the environmental assessment and recommendations. It would be your project, your expertise driving the decisions. I would just be facilitating the process. And why would you want to work for me in a subordinate role? That seems like quite a change from your previous attitude. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Because I need to prove to myself that I can contribute to something meaningful instead of just pursuing profit, and because working on a project that actually helps the environment instead of exploiting it feels like a way to make amends for the damage I've done. His answer surprised me with its apparent sincerity, but I remained cautious. This sounds like it could be lucrative work. Why not pursue it yourself and cut me out of the equation? Because I tried that approach for years, and it destroyed everything I cared about, he said simply. I'm not interested in cutting corners or maximizing profits anymore. I want to do work that matters, even if it means less money and less credit. I studied the documents more carefully, noting the property specifications and the owner's stated commitment to environmental stewardship. It was a legitimate project with significant potential, but working with Marcus would mean opening the door to complications I had spent years avoiding. I'll need to think about it, I said finally, and if I decide to pursue this, there would be conditions, strict boundaries about decision-making authority, communication protocols, and profit sharing. Whatever you think is appropriate, Marcus said immediately. This is your area of expertise, not mine. I'm offering to work for you, not with you as an equal partner. I'll review the materials and get back to you within a week, I told him, closing the folder. Leave your contact information with Sarah on your way out. After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the folder and trying to sort through my conflicted feelings. The project itself was exactly the kind of work I wanted to be doing, but accepting it would mean working closely with the person who had betrayed me most profoundly. It would also mean giving Marcus a chance to rebuild his career through association with my success, something that felt uncomfortably like rewarding his past behavior. On the other hand, his approach had been genuinely humble and deferential. He hadn't tried to oversell his role or downplay mine. He had acknowledged that this was my area of expertise and that he would be working for me rather than demanding equal partnership. If his contrition was genuine, denying him the chance to contribute to meaningful work might be punishing him for past sins rather than focusing on present realities. I spent the next few days researching the property and the family that owned it, verifying Marcus's claims about their commitment to environmental stewardship. Everything checked out. The Hendersons were third-generation landowners who had maintained their property as a working farm while preserving significant portions as wildlife habitat. They were approaching retirement age and wanted to ensure that the land's environmental value was protected even as they sought to realize some financial return on their lifetime investment. More importantly, they had specifically requested an environmental consultant with expertise in sustainable development and an impeccable reputation. When I called them directly to discuss the project, Henderson mentioned that Marcus had been completely transparent about our relationship and his past mistakes, emphasizing that he was recommending me despite the personal history because I was the best person for the job. He said you might be reluctant to work with him because of family issues, she told me over the phone. But he also said that your commitment to environmental protection was more important than any personal considerations, and that you wouldn't let family drama interfere with doing right by the land. His assessment of my character was accurate and probably calculated to appeal to my sense of professional responsibility. But manipulation or not, he was right. If this project could result in better environmental outcomes, my personal feelings about Marcus shouldn't override that potential benefit. I called him back 3 days later and agreed to take on the project, with strict conditions about our working relationship. All client communications would go through me. All technical decisions would be mine to make. He would handle scheduling, logistics, and administrative tasks, but would not represent himself as an equal partner or decision-maker. The contract would be between my firm and the Hendersons, with Marcus functioning as a subcontractor rather than a collaborator. He agreed to all of my conditions without argument, expressing what seemed like genuine gratitude for the opportunity to be involved in the project at all. We scheduled our first site visit for the following week, and I found myself both apprehensive and curious about how this unusual working relationship would develop. The Henderson property was even more beautiful than the photographs had suggested. Rolling hills covered with native prairie grasses gave way to dense woodlands that hadn't been significantly disturbed in decades. A small creek wound through the property, supporting wetlands that served as habitat for numerous bird species and other wildlife. The historic farmhouse and barn were well-maintained examples of 19th-century agricultural architecture, and several newer outbuildings showed thoughtful integration with the landscape. Marcus met me at the property entrance, arriving in a modest sedan rather than the luxury vehicles I remembered from his prosperous days. He had dressed appropriately for outdoor work, wearing boots and clothing that could withstand mud and vegetation rather than trying to maintain his former image as a polished businessman. "The Henderson are excited to meet you," he said as we walked toward the farmhouse. "They've read about your work on the Riverside Renewable Energy Project, and they're hoping you might see similar potential here." I appreciated that he was positioning himself as the facilitator, rather than trying to take credit for bringing us together. It suggested that his claims about wanting to work in a supporting role might be genuine. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were waiting on their front porch, a couple in their 70s with the weathered hands and direct manner of people who had spent their lives working the land. They welcomed me warmly, expressing enthusiasm about the possibility of developing their property in a way that would honor its environmental and historical significance. "We've been offered plenty of money by developers who want to subdivide the land for suburban housing," Mr. Henderson explained as we walked around the property. "But that would destroy everything we've worked to preserve. We want to find a way to realize some value from the land while ensuring that its ecological and historical integrity is maintained." We spent the morning walking the property boundaries, with Marcus taking notes and photographs while I assessed soil conditions, water resources, vegetation patterns, and wildlife habitat. The land had tremendous potential for sustainable development that could serve as a model for environmentally responsible land use. The creek could support a small-scale hydroelectric system that would provide renewable energy for any development while maintaining natural flow patterns. The open meadows were ideal for solar panel installation that could coexist with native prairie restoration. The mature forests could be preserved as carbon sequestration areas while providing sustainable timber harvesting opportunities. The historic buildings could be restored and repurposed as environmental education facilities or administrative offices. Most importantly, any development could be designed to enhance rather than degrade the property's ecological value. With careful planning, the land could support limited residential or commercial development while actually increasing biodiversity and environmental health compared to its current state as a working farm. Marcus listened attentively as I explained these possibilities to the Hendersons, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated he had been paying attention to my assessment. He didn't try to interject his own opinions or present himself as an expert, but focused on ensuring that our clients understood the implications of different development approaches. "This sounds exactly like what we were hoping for," Mrs. Henderson said after I had outlined several potential scenarios. "How long would you need to complete a comprehensive assessment and development plan?" "Probably 4 to 6 months for the initial environmental impact study and preliminary development recommendations," I told her. "After that, we could work together to refine the plan based on your priorities and preferences." We spent another hour discussing timeline, budget, and expectations before returning to the farmhouse to formalize our agreement. The Hendersons were clearly pleased with my approach and expertise, but what surprised me was how effectively Marcus had facilitated the entire process without trying to claim credit or prominence. As we drove back to the city in separate cars, I found myself grudgingly impressed by his performance. He had been professional, helpful, and appropriately deferential throughout the meeting. If this was an act, it was a convincing one, sustained over several hours under circumstances that would have tested his patience and ego. Over the following weeks, as we began the formal environmental assessment process, Marcus continued to exceed my expectations. He handled scheduling and logistics efficiently, communicated clearly with the Hendersons about our progress, and managed administrative details that allowed me to focus on the technical aspects of the project. When I needed soil samples analyzed or vegetation surveys conducted, he arranged for qualified contractors without requiring my oversight. When the Hendersons had questions about timeline or budget, he directed them to me while providing context that helped streamline our conversations. Most importantly, he never tried to present himself as anything more than what he was, a project coordinator working under my direction. In meetings with the Hendersons, he consistently referred to it as my project and my expertise, making it clear that any successes would be credited to my firm rather to his involvement. This professional behavior gradually began to erode my suspicion about his motives. It would have been easy for him to oversell his role or try to position himself as an equal partner, especially given his previous experience in real estate development. The fact that he consistently chose humility over self-promotion suggested that his contrition might be genuine rather than calculated. The turning point in our working relationship came about 2 months into the project, when we encountered a significant complication that tested both our professional skills and our personal dynamic. During the wetlands assessment, I discovered that the property contained habitat for a species of salamander that was considered threatened under federal environmental protection laws. This discovery would require additional studies, regulatory consultations, and potentially significant modifications to any development plans. In his previous incarnation, Marcus would have viewed this discovery as an obstacle to profit maximization, something to be minimized or worked around. Instead, his response surprised me. "This is actually fantastic news," he said when I explained the implications. "Having a threatened species on the property makes it even more environmentally significant. It means whatever development plan we create will serve as a model for how to protect critical habitat while still allowing sustainable land use. It also means the project will be more complex, expensive, and time-consuming," I pointed out, testing his reaction. "So what? The Hendersons are committed to environmental stewardship, and they're not in a hurry to sell. If it takes longer to develop a plan that properly protects the salamanders, that's time well spent." His enthusiasm seemed genuine, and over the following weeks, he threw himself into researching federal habitat protection requirements with the same energy he had once devoted to maximizing profit margins. He coordinated with regulatory agencies, arranged meetings with wildlife biologists, and managed the additional paperwork and compliance requirements without complaint. The salamander habitat discovery ultimately became one of the project's greatest strengths. By designing development around critical habitat protection, we created a plan that not only preserved ecological value, but enhanced it through strategic restoration and management activities. The renewable energy components could be positioned to avoid sensitive areas, while the restored prairie and wetlands would provide expanded habitat for the salamanders and numerous other species. The Hendersons were delighted with the refined plan, seeing it as exactly the kind of environmental legacy they wanted to create. More importantly for my professional reputation, the project began attracting attention from environmental organizations and sustainable development advocates who saw it as a model for responsible land use planning. As word spread about the Henderson property project, I began receiving inquiries from other landowners and developers interested in similar approaches. The combination of environmental protection, renewable energy, and sustainable development that we had crafted became a template for other projects, establishing my firm as a leader in the emerging field of regenerative development. Marcus listened attentively as I explained these possibilities to the Hendersons, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated he had been paying attention to my assessment. He didn't try to interject his own opinions or present himself as an expert, but focused on ensuring that our clients understood the implications of different development approaches. "This sounds exactly like what we were hoping for," Mrs. Henderson said after I had outlined several potential scenarios. "How long would you need to complete a comprehensive assessment and development plan?" "Probably 4 to 6 months for the initial environmental impact study and preliminary development recommendations," I told her. "After that, we could work together to refine the plan based on your priorities and preferences." We spent another hour discussing timeline, budget, and expectations before returning to the farmhouse to formalize our agreement. The Hendersons were clearly pleased with my approach and expertise, but
Marcus's role in these successes was significant but consistently understated. He had facilitated the process expertly, allowing me to focus on the technical challenges while ensuring that administrative and logistical details were handled seamlessly. His willingness to work in a supporting role without demanding credit had made it possible for me to do my best work without distraction. 6 months after beginning the Henderson project, we submitted our final environmental assessment and development recommendations.
The plan we had created would allow the Hendersons to realize substantial financial value from their land while creating a development that actually improved environmental conditions compared to the current agricultural use. Solar and wind energy systems would provide renewable power, while prairie restoration would sequester carbon and support wildlife. Limited residential development would be clustered in areas with the least ecological sensitivity, while the most critical habitats would be permanently protected through conservation easements. The celebration dinner at the Henderson farmhouse felt like a genuine triumph for everyone involved. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were thrilled with a plan that exceeded their expectations for environmental stewardship while providing the financial security they needed for retirement. I was proud of work that represented the highest standards of my profession while creating meaningful environmental benefits. And Marcus seemed genuinely satisfied with having contributed to a project that created value through sustainability rather than exploitation. As we drove back to the city after the celebration, Marcus asked if we could stop for coffee to discuss future collaboration possibilities. I agreed, curious about what he might be thinking, but also wary of any attempts to leverage our successful project into demands for equal partnership or greater prominence. The conversation that followed surprised me with its thoughtfulness and humility. Marcus didn't ask for greater responsibility or recognition. Instead, he proposed that we formalize our working relationship with him continuing in the same supporting role for future environmental projects. He had enjoyed the work more than anything he had done in years, he said, and felt that he was finally contributing to something meaningful rather than just pursuing profit. "I know I have no right to ask for your trust after what I did," he said quietly, "but working on this project has shown me what I want to do with the rest of my career. I want to help make projects like this possible, even if it means staying in the background and letting you get the credit." "Why?" I asked. "You could probably build your own environmental consulting business now that you have experience with this kind of project. Why are you willing to remain in a subordinate role?" Marcus stared into his coffee for a long moment before answering. "Because I spent years trying to build something impressive with my name on it, and I destroyed everything in the process. I stole from you, lied to my family, and created a business built on fraud and unsustainable debt. I lost everything that mattered to me because I was so focused on being seen as successful that I forgot about actually being successful." He looked up at me with an expression of profound regret. "Working with you on the Henderson project has been the most satisfying professional experience of my life, precisely because it wasn't about my ego or my reputation. It was about creating something genuinely valuable, something that will benefit the environment and the community for decades to come. I don't need my name on the door to feel proud of work like that." His words carried the ring of truth, but I remained cautious. What happens when you get tired of working in the shadows? What happens when an opportunity comes along that would give you more money or recognition? "I don't think that will happen," he said simply. "I've tried that approach, and it led to losing everything that actually mattered to me. I'm not interested in repeating those mistakes." I considered his proposal carefully. From a purely business perspective, continuing our collaboration made sense. Marcus had proven himself to be an effective project coordinator, and the demand for environmental consulting services was growing faster than my firm could handle alone. Having someone who could manage the administrative and logistical aspects of complex projects would allow me to take on more work while maintaining the quality standards that had built my reputation. More importantly, his transformation seemed genuine. The arrogant, greedy person who had stolen my inheritance was gone, replaced by someone who appeared to have learned from his mistakes. If he was sincere about wanting to contribute to meaningful environmental work without demanding credit or prominence, we could accomplish more together than either of us could alone. "I'm willing to consider it," I told him, "but there would need to be clear agreements about roles, responsibilities, and expectations. And if you ever revert to your old patterns of behavior, the relationship ends immediately." "I understand completely," he said immediately. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to even be considered." We spent the next hour outlining the parameters of a potential ongoing collaboration. Marcus would continue handling project coordination, client communications, and administrative tasks, while I focused on technical assessment and recommendations. All contracts would be between clients and my firm, with Marcus functioning as a senior associate rather than a partner. His compensation would be fair but subordinate to mine, reflecting both our respective contributions and the reality that my expertise and reputation were the foundation of our success. Most importantly, we established clear protocols for decision-making and client relationships. I would have final authority over all technical and strategic decisions, while Marcus would be responsible for ensuring that those decisions were implemented efficiently and professionally. Any attempt by him to exceed his defined role or to present himself as an equal partner would result in immediate termination of our collaboration. The agreement we eventually formalized was unlike any business relationship I had previously imagined, but it proved to be remarkably effective. Over the following year, we completed 6 major environmental projects together, each one building on the success of the Henderson property development. Marcus's project management skills and my environmental expertise complemented each other in ways that enhanced both of our capabilities. The projects ranged from renewable energy installations that preserved critical habitat to urban redevelopment that incorporated green infrastructure and sustainable design principles. In every case, Marcus handled the complex logistics and stakeholder communications that allowed me to focus on the technical challenges and innovative solutions that had become my professional signature. Our clients consistently praised both the quality of our environmental recommendations and the efficiency of our project management. Several mentioned that they appreciated having a single point of contact who could coordinate all aspects of their projects while ensuring that environmental considerations remained paramount throughout the development process. The financial success of these collaborations allowed me to expand my firm significantly. I hired 3 additional environmental scientists, moved into a larger office space, and began developing specialized expertise in emerging areas like carbon sequestration and regenerative agriculture. Verde Consulting became recognized as one of the region's leading environmental firms, with a reputation for innovative solutions that balanced ecological protection with economic viability. Marcus's role in these successes remained carefully circumscribed, but his contributions were significant. He had developed expertise in environmental project management that complemented his previous real estate experience, creating value through process efficiency rather than technical innovation. More importantly, he seemed genuinely satisfied with work that created environmental benefits rather than just financial returns. The most telling test of his transformation came when we were offered a lucrative contract that would have required compromising our environmental standards. A major developer approached us about a suburban housing project that would have generated substantial fees for both of us, but would have required us to minimize wetlands protection requirements and overlook potential groundwater contamination issues. In his previous incarnation, Marcus would have pressured me to accept the contract and find ways to rationalize the environmental compromises. Instead, he was the one who suggested we decline the project, arguing that the potential damage to our reputation and professional integrity wasn't worth any amount of money. "We've built something valuable here," he said when we discussed the proposal. "Why would we risk that for one big payday from a client who doesn't share our values?" His response confirmed what I had begun to believe, that his transformation was genuine and lasting. The person who had stolen my inheritance to fund a lifestyle built on lies and unsustainable debt was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true success came from creating lasting value rather than maximizing short-term profits. 2 years into our collaboration, Marcus approached me with a proposal that initially made me uncomfortable. He had been contacted by a journalist writing an article about sustainable development, and she wanted to interview both of us about our work together. The article would focus on innovative approaches to environmental consulting and would likely generate significant positive publicity for our firm. My initial instinct was to decline the interview, partly because I preferred to let our work speak for itself, and partly because I didn't want to risk having our family history become part of the story. But Marcus's perspective surprised me. "I think we should do it," he said, "not because of the publicity, but because the work we're doing represents something important that more people should know about. If our story can inspire other businesses to prioritize environmental sustainability, shouldn't we be willing to share it?" He was right, of course. The innovative approaches we had developed for balancing environmental protection with economic development could serve as models for other firms and projects. If sharing our story could advance the cause of sustainable development, my personal discomfort was a small price to pay. The interview process was more extensive than I had expected, involving site visits to several of our completed projects and lengthy discussions about our methodology and philosophy. The journalist was particularly interested in how we had developed our collaborative approach and how it differed from traditional environmental consulting models. Neither Marcus nor I mentioned our family relationship or the circumstances that had brought us together. We focused instead on our professional partnership and the environmental outcomes we had achieved. Marcus was careful to position himself as the project management specialist supporting my environmental expertise, maintaining the clear hierarchy that had defined our successful collaboration. The article, when it was published several months later, exceeded our expectations for both its thoroughness and its impact. The journalist had captured not just the technical aspects of our work, but the underlying philosophy that prioritized long-term environmental benefits over short-term profits. She had also included detailed case studies of our most successful projects, demonstrating how environmental protection could be economically viable when approached creatively. The response to the article was immediate and substantial. We received inquiries from potential clients across the region, including several major corporations interested in incorporating environmental sustainability into their development plans. More importantly, we heard from other environmental consultants who were interested in adapting our collaborative approach to their own practices. The increased visibility led to speaking engagements at environmental conferences, consulting opportunities with government agencies, and academic collaborations with universities developing sustainability curricula. Verde Consulting evolved from a regional firm to a nationally recognized leader in environmental consulting, with expertise that was sought by organizations across the country. Marcus's satisfaction with these developments was evident, but what impressed me most was his consistent refusal to claim credit beyond his actual contributions. In interviews and presentations, he always positioned himself as the operations specialist who facilitated my environmental work rather than trying to present himself as a co-equal expert. This humility was particularly notable given his previous tendency toward grandiose self-promotion. 3 years after our first collaboration on the Henderson property, Marcus surprised me with a proposal that initially seemed to contradict everything about our working relationship. He suggested that we formalize our partnership by making him a junior partner in Verde Consulting with equity ownership and shared decision-making authority. My initial reaction was skeptical and somewhat defensive. We had built our successful collaboration on clearly defined roles and responsibilities, with him in a supporting position that acknowledged both his contributions and his past betrayals. Making him an equal partner would fundamentally change the dynamic that had proven so effective. But as Marcus explained his reasoning, I began to understand that his proposal wasn't about ego or recognition. It was about commitment and long-term planning. "I want to make this partnership permanent because I believe in what we're building together," he said. "But more than that, I want to have the legal and financial stake that would make it impossible for me to walk away when things get difficult or when other opportunities arise. Making me a partner would force me to think long-term and prioritize the firm's success over any short-term temptations." It was a remarkably mature perspective, one that acknowledged both his past weaknesses and his commitment to overcoming them. By tying his financial future to the firm's environmental mission, he would be creating incentives that aligned with, rather than competed with, our shared goals. The partnership agreement we eventually negotiated reflected both the evolution of our working relationship and the lessons we had learned from his past mistakes. Marcus would become a junior partner with a 25% ownership stake, acknowledging his significant contributions while maintaining my majority control and final decision-making authority. His partnership would vest over 5 years, creating long-term incentives for continued collaboration and shared success. Most importantly, the partnership agreement included specific provisions protecting the firm's environmental mission and professional standards. Marcus's partnership interest could be revoked if he ever acted in ways that compromised our environmental commitments or professional integrity. The agreement essentially institutionalized the values-based approach that had defined our collaboration from its beginning. The formalization of our partnership marked a turning point not just in our professional relationship, but in my personal understanding of forgiveness and redemption. Marcus had not just apologized for stealing my inheritance, he had spent years demonstrating through his actions that he understood the harm he had caused and was committed to making amends through meaningful work rather than empty gestures. His transformation from the arrogant, greedy person who had betrayed my trust to a humble, dedicated professional who prioritized environmental values over personal gain was so complete that it sometimes felt like I was working with an entirely different person. The brother who had mocked my environmental concerns as impractical idealism had become someone who shared my passion for creating a more sustainable world. This evolution forced me to reconsider my understanding of forgiveness and second chances. I had always believed that some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome, that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Marcus's patient demonstration of change had challenged those assumptions, showing me that genuine transformation was possible even after the most profound violations of trust. The partnership announcement generated considerable interest within the environmental consulting community, partly because our collaborative approach had attracted attention, and partly because the combination of my technical expertise with Marcus's project management skills had proven so effective. Several industry publications profiled our partnership as an innovative model for environmental consulting firms. What none of these profiles mentioned, because we never discussed it publicly, was the personal history that had brought us together. Our family relationship and the trust fund theft remained private knowledge, irrelevant to our professional collaboration and the environmental outcomes we were creating together. But privately, the transformation of our relationship from bitter estrangement to productive partnership had become one of the most meaningful aspects of my professional success. Not because I had forgiven Marcus for stealing my inheritance, but because he had earned the right to be forgiven through years of consistent actions that demonstrated genuine change. The stolen trust fund had originally represented my grandfather's hope that I would have the financial freedom to pursue meaningful work rather than just survival. In a strange way, the ultimate result of Marcus's theft had been exactly what my grandfather had intended, though through a much more complicated and painful path than anyone could have anticipated. By forcing me to fight for what was rightfully mine, Marcus had inadvertently taught me to value myself appropriately and demand the respect I deserved. By destroying his own life through greed and dishonesty, he learned lessons about integrity and purpose that made him a better partner than he ever could have been without experiencing those consequences. Verde Consulting continued to grow and innovate, becoming recognized as a pioneer in sustainable development practices that balanced environmental protection with economic viability. Our projects served as models for other firms and inspired policy changes that strengthened environmental protection requirements across the region. Marcus's role in these successes was significant, but appropriately proportioned. He had become an expert in environmental project management, capable of coordinating complex initiatives that involved multiple stakeholders, regulatory agencies, and technical specialists. His skills complemented my environmental expertise in ways that enhanced both of our capabilities while maintaining clear boundaries around decision-making authority. The most satisfying aspect of our partnership was the environmental impact we were creating together. Every project we completed represented tangible improvements in ecosystem health, carbon sequestration, renewable energy generation, or habitat protection. The work we were doing mattered in ways that went far beyond financial success, creating lasting benefits for the environment and future generations. 5 years after Marcus first approached me about the Henderson property project, we celebrated the completion of our 50th collaborative project. The portfolio of work we had created included renewable energy installations, wetlands restoration, sustainable urban development, and innovative approaches to carbon sequestration that were being studied and replicated by environmental professionals across the country. The celebration dinner, held at the same restaurant where Marcus had first apologized to me years ago, felt like a genuine milestone. We had built something meaningful together, something that created value through environmental stewardship rather than exploitation. More importantly, we had demonstrated that even the most fundamental betrayals could be overcome through patient effort and genuine commitment to change. As I looked across the table at Marcus, discussing our plans for expanding into regenerative agriculture consulting, I realized that the person who had stolen my trust fund no longer existed. He had been replaced by someone I genuinely respected and enjoyed working with, someone whose contributions made my own work more effective and impactful. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been achieved through dramatic gestures or emotional reconciliation scenes. It had been earned through thousands of small choices, daily decisions to prioritize integrity over profit, environmental values over